Good morning, everyone. Good morning. We're discussing today what it means holy. And it says in our Torah portion that God said, I will be made holy in the Jewish people. Let's get the sentence over here. Where is it? 1 second. Here it is. There. I will be made holy inside of the Jewish people. So what does it mean that God isn't holy already? What does it mean to be holy? And how is it that the Jewish people, they do it? What are they supposed to do? Why can't everybody do it? But if anybody does it, so what's? And why does it have to be done at all? What does it mean to make God holy? So the Rebbe said, well, let's discuss what is this word to be holy? What does it holy mean? This holy, in its simple sense, means to be separated. Separated. Like we said before, a man marries a woman, so it's called kiddushin. Kiddushin means that she is now separated from the whole rest of the world. She can't get married to anybody else. She's separated to him. That's what kadosh. So also the same thing we can say just in a simple way. Beit HaMikdash, holy temple. Or the Jews are a holy people. It means they're separated from everybody else. They're different. They're different. They're separated. They're in a different sort of category. Everybody else. The same. How do we apply this to God? Kodesh, because that's the usual sense that it's used. Holy. So holy means separated. God is separated from any other existence. So God has a name. Seems that God is a thing, or at least got a name. So if he has a name, it must be some sort of a definition. What God is. No. True, God has a name, but God is totally unlike anything else in the world. God is holy. God is holy. What about the angels? Says no, God is even holy from the angels. Says that even there's three groups of angels. One group of angels says holy, and the other one says holy, holy, and the third one says holy, holy is God, the King, what is it? The God of hosts. But God is holy even to the angels. So what does that mean? So the Rebbe says like this: God creates everything. God creates the angels. God creates all the spiritual worlds. But God is not a world. God is not a creation. God is not a creation. God is not involved even in the creation. He creates everything, every detail, creates it constantly, but he's totally not involved, and it doesn't take any energy or time or space or spirit or anything from God to create the world. You understand that? So no, that's what it means holy. God exists, but he's totally incomprehensible what it means that he exists. God's existence is not in anything that we can understand existing. So that's why I've said so many times, in that sense of the word, God does not exist. Not in any normal sense of the word existence does God. God's existence is totally removed from our existence to the degree that, in fact, our existence is not existence at all. We don't really exist. We don't really exist. If we don't really exist, then who am I talking to, and who is talking, and why do I think I exist? How can I think I exist? Like all these people, they say that, the whole world is subjective. Everything is subjective. It's all in your mind. It's all in your mind. Yeah, so where does your mind come from? Where does your mind come from? Your mind is also in your mind. What does that mean? You got a bigger mind. There's another mind. Okay, don't mind. No, I say no matter, no mind. Doesn't matter, no mind. Don't mind. So what does it mean? What does it mean? God creates everything. There can't be anything more real than that. God must be real if he creates the world. I mean, that's an accomplishment, right? It says no, the world is really nothing. It's nothing. But on the other hand, the world is very important to God. That's what the whole Torah is about. So God, does the world exist or doesn't the world exist? So the answer is yes. Yes, what? This is because everything comes from God, and because God is totally undefinable We can only define the things that God does. But what God is totally removed. That in the language of Kabbalah is called Sovev Kol Olmim. Something that's called Ein Sof. The God has no end. There's no place where God stops. Don't say that God is relegated to be in heaven or something like that. Everything that exists because God is creating it all the time, and He's creating it every single instant from nothing. And so the whole world is nothing. So if the whole world is nothing, so it doesn't take anything away from God because it's nothing, right? Take the number 5 and subtract from it 0. You got 5. But you made a whole formula. You did something. You subtracted 0. Right? So let's you subtract 1,000,000 zeros from 1. What do you have left? 1. Right? 5. So the same thing. The world is like all these zeros, and guys. Okay. So in that way, then we say that if I think I exist, then you should know that God is called holy, because God certainly exists, but His existence is absolutely nothing like anything that you can possibly imagine in any way. Because your imagination can only imagine things that have some sort of definition, and God is not. Okay, so that's called Sovev Kol Olmim. God is around all the worlds, and God is not involved in the worlds, and the worlds have absolutely no effect on God whatsoever. That's holy. Okay, but so the first paragraph. But we see that what we just finished saying and we just finished proving is not so. Because we see that God does care about all the worlds. And even more, it says that just like the soul fills the body, so God fills the worlds. Huh? And that every world makes a big difference to God. And there's all these distinctions and different types of worlds. So we just finished saying in this paragraph that the worlds don't really exist. And now we're saying that the worlds really do exist and that God really creates them and He really cares about them. So if so, the worlds are really real. So if the worlds are really real, they must take something away from God. I mean, we pray to God, we ask God to do things, and God personally does things. Huh? That's the whole essence of what Judaism is. God Himself does things. Now, not by means of an angel, not by means of a person, not by means of that's already idolatry. So it would be much easier just to say that, okay, God exists, but God is very far away. And God works in the world through, angels and things like that, and people. People. So no, if you believe in, angels, that's okay. But if you believe in, because they're just messengers of God, you don't pray to an angel. You can pray for an angel, right? And I hope, may an angel come and help me. May a doctor heal me. Or may my lawyer succeed in that. That's okay. But you're praying to God for these things. But okay, nevertheless, these things exist. They must exist. So it says, yes, God creates the worlds. God cares about the worlds. Every world is different. Every creation is different. And that's what we got up to. We got up to over here. If so, moving means that we can understand this from this shachayus, shenimshach, that the life force which is drawn from God into the worlds, it is also divided. Lichilukim madregas, to all sorts of different levels. Like for instance, achayot. Let me make this bigger over here. 1 second, 1 minute. Something like the life that comes from the soul. Where is this? Skip the line. Okay, we're good. Is it different like the life which comes from the soul into the body, like we said before? So if so, here it seems that God is divided, somehow or other, and that He creates the world and He cares about the world. So He's not so removed, not so holy, not so holy as we thought He was. He's not. Right? Still, we can't imagine how God enlivens the world, what the soul is. But on the other hand, the soul is not holy in that aspect. It's just like part of the creation. It's like the batteries, right? To keep everything going, right? So God is drawing and all these different creations. So here in this previous, we said that God is totally removed from the whole entire creation. The whole entire creation is nothing. And now we're saying that God is involved intimately in every creation, and that the whole creation is something. and that each creation is different. God enlivens it in a different way and creates it in a different way. In Cain, if so, we can see that the life force which is drawn from God is also divided. So God is not totally, removed and, there's a better word for it, a good word, skipped my mind. Anyway, God is not totally removed and indifferent to the world. God is in the world and he cares what Cain and said. Also, we found also that the rabbis say clearly that they compare the life that comes from God into the worlds in the different order. They compare the life in the worlds, how God keeps the world alive, just like we can look at ourselves and see. Just like the world has a head, so there's like a human being has a head, so there's the spiritual aspect of the world, heaven, whatever. That's what the rabbis say. Makodesh Baruch Hu, just like God fills all the world, also the soul fills the body. Over Midrash Tilim, and there's another Midrash that says, Borechi Nafshi, bless my soul. One of the Psalms from King David. What is 101? Psalm. Omer, it says, Ma nefesh mamalet guf, just like the soul fills the body, also God fills the world. Hari inyan and Hashem, if so, the soul fills the body. This is in clothing and grasping. Mamash, your soul is affected by the body. Your soul is affected. The person stubs his toe. Who feels it? Your soul feels it. I stubbed my toe. It's not my toe was stubbed, right? The same thing is that if they compare God's being in the world and enlivening the world to the soul being in the body, so how far can we take this? How far can we take the metaphor? I mean, at least basically is that just like the soul enlivens the body and is affected by the body, if so, medamin kene inyan hislavshus achayos, the life force which comes in from God is in the worlds. And this is exactly what we just finished saying over here. What we said before, that God, this is lechor at first glance, the opposite, what we just finished explaining. To who Yisbrich, that God is Kodesh, he's holy, Muvdal, he's separate from the worlds. That God's existence is real and the existence of the world is not real. And that we said that God enlivens the world not by means of his labshus chas v'shalom. We said before over here that true God creates the world, but he creates the world in this totally removed way. Totally removed way. Maybe I'll just give you an example. Let's say, for instance, it's not a very good example because we can't really imagine how God can be holy and that he really exists and the world doesn't exist. But let's take an example. Let's say you daydreaming. You sit and you daydream, I won $1 million. But you sit and you think, I won $1 million. Imagine, read a book, right? I won $1 million. You think about yourself. I won $1 million. I have this $1 million now. What can I do with it? I can buy a house. I can give charity. I can buy a new car. I can dress properly. I'll dress my kids. I'll do this. He's got this $1 million. I'll invest the money. I'll make more money. All of a sudden, a knock on the door. Who is it? The landlord. Where's my rent? It says, excuse me. I'm investing. I've got millions over here that's going on. You have millions. Give me my rent, right? So the idea that you had in your mind of money, it's like really real, sort of, to you. But as soon as the knock on the door comes, and he wants real money. He wants real money. So this is sort of like, in this paragraph we said over here, the whole world is like imagination. I'm telling you, that's not a good example because when you imagine something, it does take some of your brain energy. And here we're saying, and it occupies you, at least you can't think of anything else while you're thinking about this. But well, okay, let's just take it for the example, though. Comparing an imaginary money to real money. So here we're saying the world is sort of like in God's imagination. It didn't really take anything from him. It's not really real. God is really real, and the world is not really real. And here we're saying no, that the world really is real, right? That the world is real. God is really creating it, and that God is involved in the world, and God is clothed in the world. God is like the soul inside of the body. So here it seems that the world is just a real nothing, and here the world is really something. Here it seems that God is holy, is a totally different existence than the world. And here it seems that, yes, true, God's existence is different, but not totally different. He's in the world. So if so, we see that the God is in the world like the soul is in the body. But who, and this is a klal gadol, this is a general principle in the Torah, like it's known. The EU tafis bakula, that God grabs everything, all the worlds, but lace man the tafis lay, and there's nothing that can grab onto God. Okay, so in simple English, what we're saying is God is infinitely, infinitely far away from us, further than we can possibly imagine, to the degree that our existence is not even real existence at all, and God's existence is true existence, so we cannot possibly comprehend that. That's one side. On the other hand, the God is infinitely far. On the other hand, God is infinitely close. He's creating us. He's enlivening us. Each person is different. Every second is different. Every organ is different. Every animal is different. Every plane, every tree, So God is infinitely far from us and infinitely close to us. So that's what it says. God grabs everything, but God cannot be grabbed by anything. Okay, what does this mean? Let's go. So now we're trying to understand the God of Israel. This is the God that the Jewish people want the whole entire world to believe in. And it says that's going to be the job of the Moshiach. Moshiach will bring the whole world to realize that they're being created by God who is infinitely close to them. And it's not necessary to pray to a person or to an angel or to a spirit or to a ghost or something like that. It's not necessary. Infinitely close. On the other hand, God is infinitely far. He's infinitely, infinitely greater and further away than we can possibly imagine. But he's creating angels. The angels to God are the same thing as like a little grain of sand. Nothing. So God is infinitely far and infinitely close. Now let's try to get this into our mind. So who are we praying to? For instance, when we pray, who are we praying to? Who's helping us? Achenia is like this. Tavare, certainly there is life which is enclosed in the worlds, in the inside. Umechalek, chiluki madregos, and there are different levels of life. Kamashli Chalko is just like the example of how the soul enlivens the body. Yes, God is a spiritual force that enlivens us. But the kalalos bechinas chayos, this general category of this life force, hamidlabish olamos, which is in the worlds, who rak bechinas ziv v'ashchina. It's only a ray of the Shekhinah alone. Ziv davka, like a ray of godliness. And it's the ray of godliness which comes from this aspect of God, which is called the Shekhinah. In simple language, God can articulate himself. that God has both abilities to be infinitely far and that the world doesn't exist, and to be infinitely close and the world does exist. This is what's called tzimtzum. This is the ability of God to hide over himself. Hide over himself. Now, don't think that this means that God hides over himself because the world means nothing to him. But God actually does this process because the world is so tremendously important to him, and especially human beings. Especially human beings, tremendously important to God. And that's why the Jews are chosen. We're chosen to tell the world exactly this, how important every human being is to God. Being created. God is creating you. But why, if God is creating us, why don't we feel it? It says because God, the way that, in order for God to create us, is he can't create us from his infinite power. It's like putting 1,000,000 watts into a 5-watt bulb. You want the bulb to light. You have to limit your power. And that's what's called God's Shekhinah. And from the Shekhinah, that's God's, Shekhinah means dwelling. The God comes down. From the Shekhinah comes also other rays of creation power. This is called Memale Kol Olmin. Here we said how God surrounds the world. This is how God fills the worlds. Upirish, what does it mean? Shachayos, that the life force which is drawn from God in order to be put into the worlds, who rakim b'china ziv, is just like a little ray of godliness alone. Mi'ashachina, from this aspect of God, which is called the Shekhinah, God's indwelling, you want to call it God's ability to come down. Shebechina ziv, that this ray of godliness is drawn down in order to be mamalik ha'olim, to fill all the worlds. So the motto of Judaism is that God is one. So don't think that these aspects of God means that there's two different gods, which a person can certainly be misled to think, because God is far away, and that's where idolatry comes in. That God is so far away that we can't worship God Himself. And so, what is in the world? God sends a person, or an angel, or a power, or a force, or just God is just too far away. That's all, right? And you have all these different gods, and in Hinduism they have all these different gods, and all these Eastern religions they have different forces and different this. And that which God is able to, so to speak, articulate Himself and come into different worlds, what's said, the upper heaven, etc. This ray of godliness, this is how God fills the worlds. This is the revealed worlds in the Zohar. And the reason is, on this level, it says, that's what Job said, from my flesh I can grasp God. I can really grasp, see God. Ke'ilu nira, as though you see ba'ayin mamash, with your eye. Achazeh means to see in Aramaic. Chezayon, I think that's also Hebrew. Chezayon. Achazeh. From my flesh, I can see God, really seeing God, like you see with your eye. B'chinas gilui. How can you see God with your eye? Look at anything. Look at I remember once, learned this a long time ago, in a classroom, and there was a crow. There used to be a lot more crows in Kfar Chabad. I don't know where the crows went to. A crow. And it just happened, it was like on a break, and I watched this crow.
What's a crow?
A raven. A bird. Yeah, no, the crows. Quote the raven nevermore. A raven, it's a big black bird. Huh? You know what it is? Yeah.
Maybe.
What'd you say?
I said maybe.
There's birds. What are you guys live in New York or something? There's no crows over there. You know what a pigeon is? Pigeon?
Yes.
Pigeon you got. Okay, so imagine a pigeon that's not so friendly, and it's got a big beak on it, and it's black, right? And it's black. Okay, anyway, if you ever watched a crow before, look it up. You'll look it up in Google. So I was watching this crow. The movements of a crow are tremendously sophisticated. I mean, it just really truly amazed me how they moved their head and how they moved their whole body. Anyway, I was just hypnotized by this. It was really quite amazing, And the more you watch it, you realize the more complicated and amazing it is. Now, this is, of course, nature. It's their nature. They didn't go to crow school or something to learn how to. So I looked at this and I thought, wow, this is really, this is amazing. How could a crow possibly know how to do this? It's just so amazing. And it's not necessary. What does that crow have to do all this stuff for? Let a crow be like a pigeon. Pigeons are very boring. If you watch a pigeon, they go back and forth. That's all they do, right? The crow is like very clever. You see it. Anyway, so that's just my experience. You look at these things, all of a sudden you start to see, wow, the world is really amazing, And if this is God doing all this stuff, right? So it's like, why does God have to do it? You can understand the people saying this is nature, but on the other hand, nature also doesn't have to do it. Why does? So all of a sudden you start to see that, wow, maybe there's some sort of, God is really amazing. It's incredible. Just from a simple crow. You see the wind, you see the sunset, the sunrise. Life is very, very miraculous. And you can see this, and it says, from my flesh, I can grasp God. You can see, just like it is, a person sees that he has a soul. And the soul enlivens him. Have you ever seen a dead person? It's not a nice thing. A dead animal, something like that. A dead person, it's more, evident than a dead animal. A person, when he's alive, so he talks and he moves and he can laugh and he can this. An animal doesn't have that many different, aspects of his personality. A person that's dead is just same thing like a rock. Right? It's just that there's no personality there. There's no humor. There's no intelligence. There's no emotions. There's no anything whatsoever. Right? All of a sudden, a soul comes into the body. A person is alive. That's pretty amazing. It's pretty amazing. It says just like the soul enlivens the body. Should be stalkus when the soul goes away from the body, then the body becomes pegger like a stone. Kanira Belila, like you see in the nighttime. When a person goes to sleep, that the soul goes away from the body, is Nishar Kista Dechis, there's a little sliver of life that's left in the body. Right? It says sleep is like 1/60th of death. Therefore, when we wake up in the morning, a little taste of death you've got every morning, and everybody has in their house a little sort of death room. What is it? Your bedroom. You go to bedroom, you go to sleep. You go to sleep for an hour, for 5 hours, for 7 hours, and you have a special bed that you buy, and you have the sheets, and you go there and you die. You're okay, not 100% dead, because you wake up in the morning if you're lucky. You wake up in the morning, but there's 1/60th of death. Therefore, you make every morning when you wake up, you make a blessing. Ba'amida Meshina, blessing are you, God. Brachato Hashem, machzir neshamos lefagrei mesim. You return souls. You, God, return souls to dead bodies. Because every day mitchadesh there is renewed the life which is you become a new creation. So if a sunrise is amazing, and if a crow is amazing, a bird, whatever, is amazing, and these things are really amazing, how much more amazing am I? Right? I wake up in the morning and I was dead. Where did I get my soul from? So a person can, of course, can say, what do you mean? You did? So you woke up, so if you didn't wake up, so what? It's part of nature. You can say that. But that makes life a little bit sort of boring. And also it's not true. The fact is that God really does enliven us. So just you look at your soul, you see how amazing your soul is. Hari Afalpi, even though She'en on a rowing, we do not see with our physical eyes the soul, what the soul is and how it is. Nevertheless, noted is known. V'nirgash, we can know and we can feel. Shanefesh melubesh is that we've got a soul in our body. Shari nira lana, we can see pulotel, the effects of the soul in the body. Chaimim, that the body lives from it. Shari mitzad atzmo, that on its own, hagufu ke'evan, is like a stone. Amistalek nefesh mimenu. So amazing, you see, there's a dead cat, and a stone, and a cut down tree, and a person that's asleep, right? And all of a sudden, the tree, but if you the tree is dead, if you put the soul back into the tree, so the tree acts like a tree. And put a soul back into a person, he acts like a person. He's talking and he's laughing. He's that, right? If so, the soul is, you can see that there is a soul inside of a person. Mamish say it's Lena that's by us. Shenira Lana, we can see in East Labshus and Nefesh Baguf that we can see the soul is in the body, even though that the Mahus Musag, we don't understand what the soul is at all. But Kach Mamish, the same thing is grasping God. Shahari Anuroim, we can see clearly Pola Nira that the world is like a big body, a big living body, huh? The rivers, the waters. You look at there's National Geographic. I don't know if people watch National Geographic. It's pretty anti-Semitic. They always say bad things about Israel. But anyway, it's worthwhile watching. You see the lions with the tigers, with the giraffes, and the rivers with the hurricanes, and the fires, and the mid-deserts, and everything, and all these weird creations in the desert. And the whole world is like moving. It's alive. The whole thing is alive. And you see that people think and that they write and that this is amazing stuff, right? So the whole world is like one big body. Behechrach, we have to say that there must be some sort of a life force that enlivens the world and all the creations in the world, like it's known to us, like from the soul. Ali de Pula, by that, seeing what the soul does in the body, so we can postulate from that. What's the word for it? That we can surmise. There's a better word. Surmise from that the world must have a soul to it, and the same thing, the body. We can come to the conclusion that there must be a soul in the body. There's some sort of a power. Like we see that there's life in this world, so also the creations in the upper worlds, they see clearly. And even more power, there's this life that enlivens them. Now we're going to get to these angels where one group says holy and one says holy, holy, and this is. That's what it means. From my flesh I can grasp God. Mibasori davka. just like from my flesh I can feel that and know that there is a soul that God gave to me, and that's enlivening. Also, the same thing, you can see godliness in the world. 1 minute. 1 minute. Achaya is the world which fills the worlds, that draws from Ein Sof, from infinite godliness inside of the worlds, really. Kamo, just like the soul fills the body. Kach of life also is divided into 3 different levels, like we said before: head, body, and legs. Remember we learned yesterday? Also, there's what's called Gan Eden Elyon, the upper heaven. That's the world of Bria. Gan Eden Tachton, that's the world of Yetzirah. In this world, the upper heaven, the lower heaven, in this world. Look, and therefore, God is called Memalikom, he fills all the worlds. Alma Disgalian, and it's called revealed. This is revealed godliness. Okay, so we've just finished 2 paragraphs of this mimer, which seem to totally contradict one the other. The first one said that God is holy, and that he is not grasped or perceived in any way by any of the worlds. And in fact, only God really exists, and the worlds don't really exist at all. That's what we said in paragraph number 1. Paragraph number 2, we said that God can be perceived, just like my soul fills my body, so also God fills the worlds, and that the worlds do certainly exist, and that they're very important, that from the worlds we can understand God. So do the worlds exist or don't the worlds exist? The first paragraph said they don't exist and only God exists. And the second one says that the worlds exist, yes, and that God fills the worlds and God relates to the worlds. How do we harmonize these two? How can we make peace between these 2 ideas? So it says, but this aspect of God that fills all the worlds, let me just say in a simple way. It says there's a book which is called Avodat HaKodesh. Avodat HaKodesh, and it comes from Rabbi Meir Gabai. It was written, I don't know, 500-600 years ago, maybe more, 500-600. And it says over there, and it's brought into Chassidut all the time. They say the Baal Shem Tov used to teach this book with people. And it says like this: if you say that God is infinite and that he can't be finite, then you remove his completion. You remove his completeness. In other words, you say that there's things that God can't do. The language of that he says is im tomar she'Hashem hu bli gevul v'lo bal gevul is at chaser mishleimuto. If you say that God has to be unlimited, then you detract from his infinity. In other words, God's infinity doesn't limit him to be indifferent to the world, outside of the world, far away from the world. God is not limited to being infinite. Unlimited means he's unlimited in every aspect. So God can limit himself to be. If so, you say God can limit himself, so maybe I can worship trees and worship this. So the answer to that is, therefore God gave the Torah to tell you, yes, it's true, that God is in everything, but the Torah tells us that there's certain things that it's forbidden for you to worship. God is in the trees, no doubt about it. God creates everything in the world. Everything is being created from the essence of God, and God is found in everything. But nevertheless, there are things which you cannot worship. That's called idolatry. Why? That's what God decided. If God would have said, you cannot worship anything except for frogs. Frogs you can worship. Then we could worship frogs. We could do it, right? But God said you can't worship frogs. You can't worship anything except for the God who took the Jews out of Egypt and created the world. That's the 10 Commandments. Right? Fourth of the 10 Commandments is God created the world. Chassidut explains that he's creating the world all the time. 6 days God created the world, Shabbat. And the first 2 commandments are, I am God that took you out of Egypt, believe in God. And the second commandment is, don't believe in anything else. Okay, so we see that God has these 2 aspects to him. He's not limited to being far from the world. But this aspect of God which enlivens the world, this does not detract from his unity, because it is just a ray of godliness. But God himself is holy and removed. Now, you have to remember that the fact that God, so to speak, limits his light to create the world, this is God's will. God is doing all these tricks and contractions and things like that. That decision to do this comes from God's essence. So as far away from the world is, and as far away as the world is just a little ray of godliness, and it's mamalik holmim, and it's not really the essence of God, and God is concealed, millions of concealments, this fact that God conceals us, that comes from God's essence. This world is tremendously important to God. Tremendously important, every detail. So to speak, according to the Arizal, before this world was created, there was nothing. There was no time, there was no being, there was no nothing. This world, that's it. And every instant of this world is infinite. Don't think the world is just 6,000 years, and then there's going to be another world. And there were a few worlds before our world, and it's just sort of, God is sort of bored and he just rolls around, like you play pool or something. Okay, let's have another game. Let's play another game, right? Takes the balls, takes them out of the pocket. Let's make another world. Right? We just finished one world, there's the next world. Right? That's not true. This world, that's it. This world is infinitely real. Everything that happens every single instant is infinitely real for all time, past, present, and future. That we can't understand this because it's godly, but nevertheless, this whole business is happening from Hashem himself. So don't think that Hashem, the real Hashem, is the one that's far away. And how this world is true, the world is concealing God. It's true, it's concealing God. But God wants it to be that way so that we can remove this concealment and show that the concealment was really from God's essence. That's the whole thing of Mashiach, that the world is tremendously important. That's what we learned in the Dvar Malchut, that Geula, Geula, the word Geula is 4/5 Gola. 4/5 of the word Geula, redemption, revealing God, is the world. We want God to be revealed in the world, but the world itself potentially is very good. Excellent. We just have to reveal it. Okay. The Apechin is the Chai, so it says this aspect of God that's drawn into the world and enlivens the world, and it seems to be separate from him. Right. It does seem to. Why does it seem to be separate? Because God tunes himself down, so to speak, his light. This is just a ray of godliness, of a who, but God himself, who Kodesh, is holy and separated. She'enu mislabish, that God is not in the worlds at all. That's the way it is now. The Av Gam Bechinas Achayas, and also the life force which is drawn from God, Lachayot Olamot, in order to enliven the worlds, Ikar Achayot, the main life, is not inside of them at all. Ela Mechaya Umahave Otam, that God enlivens the worlds and creates the worlds, but not by means of being clothed in the worlds. Hu bechinas soviv kolmin. So don't think that because God enlivens you, so you have a little bit of an idea what God is. You don't. You have a little bit of an idea of what God does and how God can, so to speak, limit his light, infinitely limited, to enliven you. That you can comprehend. But the essence of God is not even in the category of being understood. Even the angels don't understand. Angels still understand God. That's what we said before, that the life which God enlivens the world, this is not like the soul that's in the body. Why? Because the soul itself is in the body. But God, God enlivens the body, God enlivens the world, but God is not in them at all. God, so to speak, is above, encompassing all reality. But this ray of godliness, which in the Torah it says that's God's speech, a nimshach, which comes from into this aspect of memalik holmim, this is just a ray of godliness alone. That comes from this higher aspect of God, which is called soviv kolmim, and that is what's called ziv hashechina, the ray of God's dwelling. Hilchach, therefore, and shayach bo shum shinoi. Therefore, God cannot be changed by means of us. But lo kamo neshama, it's not like the soul that's in the body, that is affected by the body. Lefisha mihus atzmo, because God's essence, God's essence is not like the soul in the body. The soul in the body is enclosed in the body. Ve'ilasos, and if so, moving is understood. Shebechinas soviv kol, this aspect of surrounding the worlds, ein shayach ischalkus, is not relevant any difference of head and body and feet and beginning and end, etc. Like I said before God created the world, there was no being, there was no existence, there was no creation, there was no time, there was no spirit, there was no consciousness, there was no nothingness, there was no black hole, there was all these things are defined somehow or other. We can't understand what there was before the world because there was no really before the world was created. There was no such thing as before. So what was there? There was pure godliness, which what that is we don't know. But we do know that this pure God is what's creating us right now. But he's creating us by means of this process that he dims down, so to speak, and conceals his light. Because this aspect of God's essence is not in the worlds. And that's what it says, that's what we say in our prayers, that God's name is elevated alone. Hodo, only a ray of God is on the earth and the heavens. What does it mean? Sharaka Ziv, only just a ray, a glimmer of godliness, God's reality, and a hod, another word for the same thing, a shine, of God's name is in the worlds. So God's name, that's sort of like we said, is like the Shekhinah. God's name, a name is relevant to something that's outside of you. So God's name, that's how God has the ability, so to speak, to enliven the world, and the life force which enlivens the world, that's just a ray of God's name. Oh, but Shemo Atzmo, but God's name itself is not enclosed in the world. God's name is Niskav Shemo. God's name is elevated from the world. Like it says, Ein Aroch Elecha. There's no comparison to God. That it's impossible to be drawn in life from God at all. In an orderly way of cause and effect. And Inyan Ilav, all of this idea that one higher world emanates from a higher world, a lower world. That's called Ila, the cause, the Ulul, and the result, cause and effect. This is only how the worlds tumble down, so to speak, from God's essence, from one world to another world. Lower and lower. That's what we said about these angels. One group says holy once, and one twice, and one three times. There's all these different Shemea. This is Shemea Seichel Mehava Mira. This is like in a human being. We can see that from a person's mind comes emotions. And from the emotions come thought. In other words, in our body, we said that from our body we can grasp godliness. So we have an idea, and the idea gives birth to an emotion, and the emotion that gives birth to all sorts of thoughts, and the thoughts give birth to action. So we see that there's levels and levels and levels coming down. The same thing is in the worlds, that there's higher worlds and lower worlds, which is not the case God himself. God himself is what's called Soviv Kol. He surrounds all the worlds. Ve'enu nitfas, and he is not grasped in any of the worlds at all. Like a effect is grasped by its cause. Ela ein aroch l'cha, there's no comparison whatsoever. And on this it says, Niskav Shemo, that God's name is elevated alone. Therefore it says, I am God, I never change. God, you are there before. The same God that was before the world was created is the same God right now after the world was created. Akol b'shava, everything is equal. God did not change at all. All right, so what's the Rebbe trying to do? The Rebbe is trying to explain what it means that God is one. Because if we say that God is one, so that somehow implies that there's nothing else except for God. When we say God is one, it doesn't mean that as far as gods goes, there's only one God and not two gods. That's the common misconception of the word monotheism. Monotheism seems to imply there's mono, only one, theism, one God, one monotheism. But really, we should say mono, what is it, existentialism? I don't know how you want to say it. There's only one being, only one existence. and that is God, and he creates everything. Don't say that the world itself is existent. What we see here as reality, right, that's created by God. And it's created by a very, very, very dimmed down aspect of God, but it still is God. It still is the oneness of God. V'zeu lashon. I just skipped over. Zeu, that's what we say by God in our prayers. Elokim Chaim u'melech olam. That God is the living God, and he's the king of the world. What does it mean? That which God is a living God, that there's drawn from him life to be in the worlds and in every creation. Lochem, therefore, Elokim, that's why it's called Elokim. God, the word in Hebrew for God, there's a lot of words for God. One of them is the word Elohim. Elohim. It says Elokim because you don't say God's name out of context. So you're worried about, so really it could have said Elohim. The word Elokim, this name of God, is plural. Yud Mem implies plural. Singular would be Eloha, God. And Elohim, plural. Why is it plural? Because this is an aspect of God which can be divided, so to speak, into all this different, is because Ribo Yischalkos, there's all this divided different types of life in each one of the worlds. That's what it means, Elohim Chaim, a living God. What does it mean, living God? Because the life that comes from God is only just from Melech Olam, how God makes himself a king over the world. God enlivens the world from only his lowest aspect, the lowest aspect of the 10 Sefirot, that's called God's kingship. Or we said before, God's name. Sometimes it's called God's mouth. His kingship. Hainu mibechinas midas malchuso, from the aspect of God's kingship, and God's kingship is the lowest aspect of God. That's the king of all the world. That's the highest aspect of all the worlds. From there, it's also drawn down to be the whole Seder Ishtalshlus, the whole entire chain of creation of all the worlds. Iluv Allah, cause and effect. I'm going to have to stop here. I just want to see how far we have to go. From God's kingship, like I said, Malchut Cho Malchut Kolamim. We say, God, this is in Psalms, and we say it three times a day, at least. Your kingship, God, is the kingship of all the worlds. In other words, your kingship, which is the lowest of God's 10 Sefirot, Malchut is the lowest, is the highest aspect of all the worlds. And from there, it's drawn down also to be the whole order of creation. Iluv Alul, cause and effect, above, high, low, just like we said, the body and the head. Excuse me. Like a body has a head to it, which is not the case. God's essence is Kodesh Muvdal. God's essence is holy and separated. just like a king. The king, his kingship, the fact that a king is a king, what does it mean he's a king? That's the lowest aspect of the king, how he comes down into the world, to his people. The king can make an edict, he can write a decree, and this decree stays there even after the king is not even there anymore. That's like the most external part of the king. That God creates the world, it seems that the world is separate from God. It's like an edict, a letter from God, that God made the world, and then God does his own business, whatever is up in the heavens. That's the way it seems. That's God's kingship, the lowest aspect of God. That's what creates all of the worlds. This is the real king over them. And similarly, we can understand above that all of the life force of the world only comes from God's kingship. The level of Malchut, from this comes all of the life force and all of the worlds, the upper worlds, the heavenly worlds, the spiritual worlds, the physical worlds, they all come from only the lowest aspect of God, which is called God's kingship. Now, the interesting thing is that God does have these aspects. God has the 10 Sefirot, to the degree where it says that this idea of the 10 Sefirot of God, that's the secret of faith. Because if you don't believe that there's 10 Sfirot, then you'll think that God is just too far away. And what's ruling the world? The world is a separate entity. That's what's called two Shtei Reshuyot. There's two domains. There's God's domain, and then there's the world's domain. That's already the seed of idolatry. That God is far away, and if you want something done, so you have to ask a planet or something. Okay, we're going to have to continue this tomorrow, God willing. That's the idea of the Shekhinah, of God's Shekhinah, and the ray of the Shekhinah is drawn down, life force, to all of the worlds. And now we're going to talk about, tomorrow we're going to talk about how this is relevant to me and you today. Now let's learn the Dvar Malchut, words of the Rebbe. 1 second.